So I've been in the old guard for about 3 years now, um, which is how long I've been doing fife and drum music. So I grew up just kind of in the high school band program. Um, well, I started in middle school in sixth grade doing percussion and stuff. And then all the way up until senior year, I started doing drumline. So that's where my rudimental foundation is. My high school actually we marched match grip. So all of my chops come from doing snare the wrong way. Not really the wrong way, a different way. But it set me up better for bass drum, uh, just because, the symmetry of everything, I really like it. Um, it's a lot easier for me, I think, to get a stronger sound quality, a more even sound quality. But yeah, after high school, I did uh, the Army band. I enlisted when I was 18, and I've been doing Army stuff since 2009. So it's been about 13 years, almost. Um, and yeah, like I said, I've been in the old guard for about 3 years. Um, my main job is as a bass drummer. So, obviously that's what I'm going to be talking about. Can't really talk too much about snare drum. Basically, what I wanted to talk about today is some of the basics. I know this is an intermediate class, but it might be refreshing to get a different take on how I view things. My approach to the grip, the swings and all that, overheads. Everybody's got a different foundation, whether they grew up in fife and drum or not, or they maybe grew up learning from a different teacher. Like all my ancient rudimental snare drum stuff, I learned from Sergeant Major Mark Riley. We were doing stuff just like this over Zoom and Skype and all that. And a lot of the bass drum stuff I picked up from my trainer when I got to the old guard, Mike Dillman. Stellar bass drummer, just absolutely insane chops, beautiful technique. Everything is very flowy and awesome. And yeah, I love watching him. And I love that I got to start my development with that guy because he's awesome. So to start off, I want to talk about how I approach the drum from the beginning, right when I start a practice session, or if I have time to warm up before a gig or a rehearsal. I always make sure that the ergonomics are taken care of first. Obviously, that's easy if I'm using a strap because it's the same every time. But usually, like right when I put the drum on, I'll make sure that, okay, my center, it's with the strap on, it's hard to like look over, but we luckily have like ceiling high mirrors in the drum room. So I can use that to kind of gauge here, and then, are both my overheads the same height, all that. So that's what I think about. I always try and stay relaxed. A really good starting thing to do right before your warm up is just do kind of some stretches. Like you don't even have to do it with mouths on. Just like kind of visualize your full range of motion. You don't have to go back too far. The basis of my technique, I try not to go past, hopefully you can see this. I try not to go back past here, which I guess would be 90 degrees from playing position. Anything beyond that, you can start to, like if you like whip back for accents, you can start to sort of hurt your shoulder, especially if you're not doing these stretches and stuff like this. So I do like the old. A lot of you guys probably remember this from like grade school PE, just doing like tiny circles up to like medium and then big, and then I'll go back the other direction. So really basic stuff. And then that's it for warming up. Besides the playing portion, when I'm working on playing, I'm really trying to like explore the space, so to speak. Like I said, like coming out 90 degrees, I try and always, this is a big thing that we look out for in auditions. It's like, is the player coming all the way out here? Because if the majority of their playing resides in this zone, they're not really getting the maximum leverage into the head, and they don't have as wide of a dynamic range. And dynamics, like the dynamic range is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later in the class, as it relates to musicality and how we can think about technique in terms of making crescendos in less dense passages like this, or because if you just try and do that without thinking about it, it might happen, but if you don't know the how and the why, and it's kind of hard to do this effectively the same way every time and kind of train it. It's good to have a solid foundation, a little bit of groundwork before you go ahead. So the next thing, we talked about ergonomics. Now I want to talk about grip. I always think about holding the mallet, like an ice cream cone. That's what Dave Loyal always told me. The grip sort of widens and gets a little bit looser towards the top. Mainly focused on these two fingers here. Allows us to swing it into the head, right? So since this is an intermediate class, I won't delve too deep into that. The stroke, I think, needs to be visited every so often, just to kind of study how the follow through works and where like the grip ties into this, right? With your fulcrum point where you're holding the stick, because it's a lot like swinging a baseball bat to me, and it's a perishable skill. I went on leave. I just went on leave for about 2 weeks. Obviously, I can't touch a drum, so all I can do are these stretches, and I'm probably not very likely to do that when I go on leave. And I definitely didn't do it this time, but that's all to say it's a perishable skill. I like to stand in front of a mirror. This is kind of like a mirror because I can see myself, and it's kind of weird. I'm like watching myself give a class, but I'll get in front of a mirror and really analyze like as slow as I possibly can. Like I'm imagining this elliptical, like sort of a teardrop shape, really slowly. Sometimes not even like hitting the head. I'm just like analyzing the path of the mallet as it approaches. And right when I get to about here, so I'll come out here, that's when I'll start to think about engaging my wrist and turning my arm over. Even though I'm using mainly arm here, the wrist and the arm they're both working in concert, because you don't see this kind of thing where it's just the arm static. My technique is blending the two, because it's almost like the second half of a molar stroke. If you've ever worked on that with snare drum, like this whole thing, starting from the elbow, you got the wrist break, and then whipping it back in. So what happens on the second half of that is the hand is coming down. The hand is the first thing to move. And you watch the tip of the stick here, it's kind of like just hanging out, waiting to be whipped into the head, right? So I think of bass drum similarly. So when I'm out here, the first thing that moves is the base of the mallet. So like the butt of the mallet, where my pinky is, that's like the first thing. My arm is what initiates the stroke, and then the bead or the head of the mallet follows, and then wha-pow. That's sort of where the wrist turn happens, and then you get a stroke. There's varying levels of wrist that I use, depending on the musical situation. Like if I'm like doing triplets, you know, something in 6/8, I'm sort of prepping and doing all this sort of stuff. And it's when I'm thinking about a wide open part like that doesn't have that many notes, I'm able to move my arms a little bit more, especially with the preps. So it's a little bit more fluid than this. You know, this is a little bit more concentrated right in this area. But if I'm combining the wrist and the arm, it's an opportunity to make it look a little bit more flowy, a little bit more fluid. So I hope that makes sense. Are there any questions so far?
I have one. How are you handling your wrists as you're coming off that stroke? So I know with a molar hit, your wrist sort of comes up and drags the stick with it.
Yeah.
Are you doing something similar?
So that's why I call it the second half of the molar stroke. Oh, maybe I should call it the first half. Everybody associates molar with the prep, right? Like that's what. So maybe that's what I was thinking of when I was referring to the second half. But really, the first half of the bass drum stroke is kind of that molar-y whip without the wrist break on up. So converted to bass drum, it's not like I'm coming out like this. It may look like that sometimes because of the path of the stroke. But if you really kind of hone in on what the wrist is doing, I'm trying not to come out like this. Like the mallet in my playing, obviously nothing is exact, nothing is absolute, but when I am playing, I'm never like this. The mallet is never pointed in towards the head. It's always some degree of pointing out or straight up and down. Because if I do start doing that and I do get into the whip things, my body isn't set up like that. Like I've only been doing this for 3 years, so I'm trying to play in the way that makes sense for my experience, and I'm trying not to do anything too radically different. because if I'm playing a lot of notes, and some of our drum solos, there are a lot of freaking notes. It's really hard to get this whip to happen during that massive flurry of notes and have it still be healthy for your wrist, because you got to think about it like our job, we got to be able to do this for a long time, 20 years. We got to do the same type of job. And while the music changes, the playing style doesn't really. Sometimes it changes, but like going from, if somebody in charge switches over, they might have like a few minor tweaks, but the general gist of it kind of stays the same. And that's all to say that doing this, if I were to do this repeatedly in a drum solo, it would tweak something in my elbow. I've already got tennis elbow a little bit that I deal with. I have to put a strap here to kind of put some pressure on there. Usually if I'm doing like a long practice session, I put it there, and that helps with like the aggravation and stuff. But yeah, to answer your question, for the prep, it's like a velocity technique, no lead with the bead kind of approach. Dave Loyal, when I was working with him before the audition, he was telling me lead with the forearm. And I was like, what does that mean? Because up until that point, I'd never played bass drum before. So that he used that to kind of like plant a seed in my head that you're going to be using a lot more arm than you're used to. Like bass drum is almost primarily arm, with like sprinklings in of wrist, you know, here and there. When you're playing low notes, that's low dense notes. It's a lot of wrist. So I hope that answers the question. Like if I'm doing a molar style exercise, like a tap, accent tap thing, you see, like I'm still trying to get this ellipse thing going on. But when I prep out, when I come out, I'm coming off the head, getting off the head as quick as possible. You know, because if you play too into the head on an accent, it's gonna buzz. And it's not gonna allow the drum to vibrate as much. On our new drums that we just got from Dave, he made them out of ash, and I don't know if this is the main, just like a characteristic of ash, the wood, but these drums are very sensitive to what stroke types you use. So like the difference between a light stroke and a dark stroke, like how much kind of oomph you put into the stroke. Like this is, I'm playing low, I'm playing soft, but the height or the distance off the head is not what determines the volume, because I can put a little bit more force behind the stroke and get more sound out of it. So that was one of the things that made me think a little bit differently about drumming when I came to the old guard, because I never thought about the amount of speed or velocity that you put behind the stick or the mallet. That really does change the sound a lot. So I don't know how many of you guys have played timpani or have heard about Timpani Technique. The basis of the technique is get out of the head as quickly as possible. So you'll see orchestral players, you know, play most of the time with French grip, where their thumbs are pointed up, right? And you'll see a combination of arm and wrist, but it's that technique is mainly so you can get up as quickly as you can. Because here with German grip or American grip, yeah, you can train yourself to prep very quickly, you know, as quick as you need to. There's no no one is saying that you can't work hard enough in order to overcome the deficiencies in each one of these grips, because each one has their own pros and cons. It's just, it makes a little bit more sense for you to play like this if that's primarily your job on that instrument, you know, to pop up and play out of the head. And the reason you want to come out of the head as fast as possible is so that the head can open up. You've said what you needed to say, right? You played your note. Now get out of there so that the drum can resonate. Because if you apply too much force into the head, there's a chance that you're going to get like a micro buzz on the head. And what that's doing is, it's like, picture like this is what it is in slow motion. What's going on? Those micro buzzes, you're like doing this and then coming out. That's very, very slow motion, but that's what's happening when you hear, like, especially when you hear somebody try and do a double stroke roll on a bass drum. You might hear me do it. Like, my left hand is not rebounding quickly enough for that second diddle. So there is a little bit of a thing going on. Yeah, the prep, using the lead with the bead helps you get out of the drum faster. Because a bass drum is basically a timpani with two heads. That's how I think of it. Because any instrument that has a head that big is going to behave that way, and you need to, you know, hit it and get out of there as fast as you can.
Hey, Mike, we got a question from Molly.
All right.
What do you suggest to help strengthen that left hand so that you aren't like staying on the head too long and keeping up with your more dominant hand while you're playing?
So the exercise I use, well, I use like a whole suite of different exercises to help fix this. If you are doing triplets, picture like a bar of 6/8. I don't have any printouts, but just picture a bar of 6/8 where you are starting with the left hand. You have two lefts and then a right. Okay, so you have a few options on how you could play that sticking. You could do low, and I don't know if you noticed the motions, the ovals here. There's a little bit of arm motion there. You can choose to just use wrist, or you can use only arm and work on that. But to specifically work on pulling that note out of the head, you don't have to play super loud. I recommend working on all dynamic levels, all stick heights, but you can even crescendo it. But what you're doing here is you're forcing your arm to, so you have the double stroke roll, right, where it's right, right, or left, left, right, right, left, left, right, right. That's, if you take away the right hand, all you're doing is 1 E and 2 E and 3 E. So it's a cycle of 4 notes, right? Or the space of 4 16th notes. Now, what you have with this is the same thing as the double stroke roll. You're just taking the second note off of the right hand, and then, you know, you can just do this, right? And then you're just scooting scooting them together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that's really simple, like really ridiculously simple. And there's a reason for that. If you take simple patterns and see how much mileage you can get out of that pattern by doing a bunch of different variations, that, excuse me, that one pattern just solved like a myriad of issues for you. And it's the most simple thing. But guess what? There's like a million different patterns. So there's a million different opportunities to get better. And that can be daunting. It's just, if you just pick this exercise, you do left, like soft, loud, soft, soft. So like you're accenting the second left hand. You can do it that way, or you could do right, left, left. Notice how I'm stopping there. I'm playing a downstroke and ending closer to the head. That's usually what's happening when you get faster with this. Your body hasn't learned yet how to rebound fast enough, right? That's happening because you're playing a downstroke. Like your body wants to be done with that note. And like you haven't learned yet how to loosen up and allow the rebound. So I encourage people to come up with their own exercises, like use their creativity, because it's not hard. You just have to pick the problem, like diagnose the problem, and that's what an instructor's for, I guess. But once you know what the problem is, you can kind of figure out a plan for how to fix that. That's all on your own. Like that's completely up to you. Because you don't always have an instructor like right in front of you diagnosing every single issue. It's like, oh, you swung too deep there. That's why it's important to record yourself. Sorry, my throat is really dry. Grab a drink. Is that starting to make sense? I know I'm pretty long-winded, but I hope that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, I find I often muscle through my left arm more than, like, my right arm is pretty, the tension in it is good, but I often muscle through that left hand because I get nervous. So.
Oh yeah, I get nervous too, and the nerves are crazy. The main thing that helps me is we have this exercise called Irish Spring, and if you just break it down to one bar of it, it's really simple. Same thing, it's like triplets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you add the second bar, there's a little turnaround lick where it goes, well, I'll just play it for you so you know what it sounds like. So if you are trying to play that all at the same dynamic level, the same height, you have to be aware of what your hand is doing, what both hands are doing right after they come off of the head. Are they staying put right here? Or are they rebounding? Because in order to play that exercise correctly and play relaxed, you have to train yourself to hit it and get right out of the way as fast as you can. So it's really beneficial to break this fundamental down, like a diddle, a very slow diddle that is really hard to rebound on a big bass drum head. It's a lot harder than on a snare drum. You have to know what that feels like. So even before you work on diddles, this shuffle pattern, if you don't know what it feels like to truly rebound and get out of the way of the stick, like get your hand out of the way of the stick, then you need to go back to basics. This 8 on a hand exercise. Or 8, 8, 16, whatever. To just kind of like really acquaint yourself with what this is supposed to feel like. You can, I feel dishonest. This is kind of weird, but like, this is how my brain works. I feel dishonest or something. I get that feeling in my head if I have tried to run before I can walk in practice, so to speak. So if I try and play something that is like way beyond my skill level, I don't feel good about it. It sucks because like all of the motions and stuff, they're not fluid. Because I've never played it before. I don't know it. There's no possible way for me to be fluid at that difficulty level because I haven't broken it down to the slowest level and worked out, like honestly, worked out every single, every note. What happens before the note, what happens right after the note. Because like 90% of your, I made up that statistic, but for argument's sake, 90% of all your mistakes are because of what happened right before. So if you kind of do your homework and really analyze your own playing, be your own teacher in that moment, you're gonna get like so much better. It's all this is, all drumming is variations on this. All of your drumming hinges on your ability to be able to do this and rebound right out of the head. Everything we do is a variation of that. It's faster, slower, combined with different stroke types, all that stuff. So it really is simple. I know I talk a lot, but I want to paint it with a brush that says that it's a lot less complex, than I might make it out to be. Does that make sense? Cool. So does anybody have any other questions on general stick control or stroke types? Because that was my next thing on my little to-do list. Okay. We got a little bit into the managing of the rebound. That's the next topic. Like I said, be a student of all these stroke types. Know exactly where they're supposed to go, because the physics that are at play, if you're like big mass of meat right here, your entire arm is staying right here. That stick is like, if you have a really fast passage, like to be able to play that accent, you have to pull it out very quickly. So that upstroke or outstroke or whatever, upstroke for snare drum, that prep is extremely important. So let's see, what else we got here. So has anybody here worked on snare drum at all? A little bit? Okay. So bass drum is just a sideways snare drum, right? You know, for all intents and purposes, all of the rules that apply for snare drum would apply to the bass drum. It's just things happen on a larger scale. You can't physically play as many notes as a snare drummer as fast, as easily. Like that's my whole asterisk on there, because there's always going to be people who are going to try and be a legend. Like Nick Ananasio was a legend because dude could play 30-second note paradiddles like it was nothing. You know, notice that I didn't attempt that. That guy was absolutely insane, and if you haven't checked him out, there's great videos of him on YouTube. I found a few. Maybe I'll post them later, like in the link dump. There's a few videos of him, like where the camera is dead on, and you can see the way his hands move, everything. It's so awesome because you can like break down like just how deep he goes for his overheads, right? They're just insane, and all the power that he it's like his entire body goes into the stroke. It's incredible. But where was I going with this? I'm nerding out. Talk about the video. Well, anyways, let's see. Talk about all the preps.
Speed. You were talking about the speed of your strokes.
Yes. I was trying to segue somehow into talking about bass drum rudiments and relating it to snare drum, how everything is just on a much bigger scale, right? Yeah, I remember now. Yeah, like Nick would attempt these insane feats of bass drumming speed and stuff, play all these snare drum rudiments on the bass drum, and that's awesome. And the only way that can actually happen is by breaking down rudiments with all these stroke types, just like you do on snare drum. So I'm gonna play a little snare, little match grip snare. This isn't really a rudiment. I guess it is. It's a single stroke roll, just alternated with accents, you know. Just triplets. But when I slow it down, I'm trying not to be super jerky about it. I don't know if the frame rate for this camera is helping, and like things are coming across, but this principle of getting out of the drum applies to both snare drum and bass drum. You know, when you prep for a note, when you're breaking down rudiments, you want to get prepped in all that time frame, so that there's no like tension. I think slowing down that double stroke roll idea is really going to help with your relaxation, because really all that's happening with this rudiment is like the one stroke like this. If you can do a stroke that's quick like that with a lot of, trying to scoot over. with that velocity, and you come right back up here, or you're down here and you want to come up for a louder note, you want to practice slowly the way that you need to play quickly, if that makes sense. So like when you're playing something up like this, there's no way I'd be able to do that if I hadn't first practiced playing that soft note and prepping quickly, right? And it's not like I'm playing that like weak, that low note. Just because it's soft doesn't mean I play it without intention. You want to, the point of working on all these rudiment breakdowns and stuff, something you have to keep in mind is every note matters. And so every note deserves the same amount of attention and intention. So like play every, even if it's way down here, or like you have flam accents, you want to play all these inner notes with intention. Not all of these words rhyme. The next one I was going to say is tension. Like that doesn't mean like just to get the stick to move quickly, you need to tense up. All you have to do is move this all the way down here and just get it to feel as much like this as possible. Get like analyze the motion of the tip of the stick. It's a fast down and fast up, right? A lot of people refer to that as like a stovetop stroke, like you're hitting something that's too hot. You don't want to. You're like it's that kind of thing. Like get down and get up as quickly as possible, so that when you're down here and training this, you know what that sort of looks like. And notice I'm not doing this. I'm not prepping and then like I start here, but then I prep to play a note. You need to break that down and play very slowly. I'll move to the bass drum. Because that's unnecessary motion. And when you're moving quickly, or when you're playing lots of notes, you don't have time to do that. It makes more sense to be able to know what this feels like, as opposed to, prepping for every single note, like prepping outward for every single note. Unless you're playing something that is deliberately a slower and more open rhythm, like obviously you see me doing this a little bit more there. That's because it's kind of a more fluid sound, or fluid visually. The time to practice this, that's more for, you wouldn't play at that tempo for a performance using that technique, right? It looks kind of rigid, not, it's not conducive to playing very open, stylized rhythms. Or not stylized, but I think you know what I mean. Versus this. Even though the technique changes, I'm still prepping in the same places. So, yeah, painfully slow, because that's what you need to do for this. All the preps happen in the same places. All the downstrokes happen in the same places. if you watch this, that prep is still happening. It's just a little bit more legato as opposed to staccato, you know. Let's see. So rudiment breakdowns, they work the same way on bass drum as they do on snare drum. And they're equally important for bass drummers to work on. So bass drum rudiments are not necessarily the same sticking as snare drum rudiments. They can show up and sound like they complement a snare drum rudiment while not necessarily being the same sticking, if that makes any sense at all. So for a lesson 25, you have or some variation of that. That's right, right, left, right, right, left, right, if you take out the drag. Now you can play it that way on bass drum. In fact, it's written that way in a lot of scenarios. So come to here, you know, there's that shaping. Well, you also might see this, and I don't know if it's coming across on the microphone, but I am trying to do, I'm trying to shape it upwards. So just because the sticking might be different, your job as a bass drummer is to kind of make it sound like that rudiment, just without the drag. So because of that, it makes sense to break that down, break that sticking down. So if for every snare drum rudiment, you could have this list of all the different scenarios or all of the different sticking combinations that you could have on the bass drum. And it makes sense to practice all these because you never know when you're going to, you know, come across that. So I would just like really break this down. And I'm trying to start the prep right after this note, or actually after the first note, because the last note on the previous hand, just watch how I'm prepping it. So right after the final note that this hand plays is when the prep happens, right? Because the next note that hand has to play is very loud. Prep, prep, prep. So the reason you do that, I'll reiterate it again. You're practicing things for when they occur much more quickly. So when you practice fast things slow, you have to practice them the way you would play them fast, if that's your goal with that, you know, if that makes any sense. And then you speed up. And before you know it, look at that. My hand knows where to go because I practiced it that way. If you practice it the way, like you practice it as if you don't have the time to just chill out right in playing position. Because like if you do this, geez, I don't even know if I can do it. You're kind of practicing it for only one situation. You get a lot more mileage by practicing it as if it were fast. So yeah. Any questions about accents and rebounds and stick control, all that? I should probably check that if there's any chats. 2 chats. Okay, cool. I guess I can leave that open. That's kind of cool. Talked about extra roots. Okay, this is the big thing that I wanted to get into, because I never had an instructor that really broke this down for me. They just said, play a crescendo. Just make it gradually louder as time goes on. But how do you practice that? How do you practice crescendos and decrescendos in a way that what we talked about previously? How do you work on that slowly? Because it's a lot harder to keep track of how loud something is if it's more spaced apart. Like, probably make more sense to demonstrate this on a snare. So you have a roll. It's very easy to pick out the differences. Like, you can hear the swell and the difference between each hand. It's like, whoa, because it's happening on a short time frame. But if you are breaking it down to something like this slow, something like that, that's where those preps come into play. And the stovetop, you have to kind of force yourself to start thinking differently about what makes a crescendo. You have notes down here, and then it's like a gradient, right? And I know one size does not fit all. Like, if you were to work on this, it's for very specific scenarios that happen a lot. And certain things, the mentality for a crescendo to just be make it louder somehow, gradually make it louder within the time frame that your section leader dictates. Like, say you have a 4-count roll, 2 and 3. Okay, that was pretty gradual, pretty even crescendo throughout. So what could you do to that? You could wait until the last count to bring that crescendo out, like 3, or stay low just for the first beat and then start the crescendo on the second beat. Those are very specific cases that this concept doesn't really work for, but this concept will make those better indirectly, because you're working on crescendoing slowly. That was a lot of words. I'm sorry, I'm very long-winded, but I promise we're getting to the point. The easiest way to describe this is with one hand and a bar of eighth notes. So we'll do 4 counts of eighth notes. Right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So if you break that down slowly, you have more even. What I'm trying to do is all my preps, I'm trying to be like precise with them on a very micro level. So each individual note I'm thinking about, just like we were working on with accents and rebounds, prep, knowing where the different stroke types happen. The same applies for crescendos. It's just like it's a little bit different of a prep every single time. So your first note is here, and your last note is up here. So just every time you play a note, listen to it. Make sure the prep begins, or how do I say this? The prep needs to be higher than the last note that was played, right? Because normally you practice this stovetop where you start at one height and then you try and like come back to the same height. I know the stick is wobbling a little bit, but you get the picture. In this situation, the prep just kind of ends. It has to end up where you want to go, if that makes sense. Prep a little bit higher, a little bit higher. So this is teaching you two different things. It's teaching you controlled preps, which you need for rudiments like a flammed mill, because you break that one down as if you were playing it fast, and that's kind of what happens. There's like a little decrescendo on those first two notes. So slowly, if you were to break that down like that, you would need a controlled rebound. Because you're not playing the first two notes the same dynamic, right? So top, 2, 3, A, B, C. So that's a good transition into the decrescendo. It's the same rule applies. Your prep, it's going the opposite direction, right? It's kind of like this time you're doing controlled downstrokes. Before you were doing controlled prep or upstrokes. Now you're doing, you have to train yourself to sort of turn a downstroke into a prep. Like it's a combination of the two. Now take a look at how that looks on bass drum. This is one of those things that you're going to get so much out of doing. I personally did. It just helps with general awareness and being and control, So if you start here, it probably makes more sense to start here and then prep. So you have two choices. You can do that or do that elliptical thing. But there's still a degree of prep, and each time I play one of those notes, what happens to the ellipse? It gets smaller, or the teardrop. It gets smaller and smaller. So that's where practicing in front of a mirror comes in, or videotaping yourself, so you can really analyze all that stuff. The thing I like about videotaping yourself is like you're simulating the pressure of an audience, because it's like, oh, the video camera's on, now I feel the pressure to make it perfect. If I don't make it perfect, then I'll be afraid to watch the video. So yeah, I love videotaping myself play because I feel like I learn the most when I'm watching myself. Because then you can actually slow things down. That's what I like about the iPhone. You can slow things down, and also like if you put your thumb on the frames at the bottom of your screen in the Photos app, you can go frame by frame and brutally break yourself down into all these little chunks and be very specific. It's like, okay, why did that sound the way that it did? Yeah, but anyways, crescendos, decrescendos, just think about the way that you prep after every note. The way it starts, the logical progression to work on this is to start with individual hands. Then move on to interlacing those and doing alternating strokes. That's one, again, very, very much worth breaking down, very slow to see in a mirror when am I coming out? Or what stroke types am I using? I sound like a broken record, I know. Okay. So now that we understand the basics of crescendos and decrescendos, there are different musical situations, just like for all these other techniques that we talked about. You might have just crescendoing eighth notes. Like the first bar in a tune called Finnegan's Wake, you have so that's a little bit more open. So I'm sure you notice I've got a more elliptical pattern. Obviously, I'm not going to have enough time to explore all that space if I'm doing like this. Like before and after, sure, because there's a gap in time. There's time to prep for the next filler. But if I do a crescendo there, obviously that's confined to like right here. If you watch where my wrists are, so yeah, basic concept of that would be faster, less motion.
So, Mike, we got about 15 minutes left in our time for this afternoon. I don't want to rush you.
Already?
Yeah.
Cool.
But I mean, if there's any things that you want to hit on and emphasize with the time that we have remaining, I wanted to give you an opportunity to do that. But then also, if there are any other questions from the participants, give them a chance to ask questions too. So, any last topics that you wanted to spend a little bit of time on, and then let's see if there are any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Billy. Yeah, talking about the filler, the only other thing that I would say is get as much mileage out of that figure as possible. Because like I said, with every rudiment has all these different variations or different ways that you can practice them, and they're all equal. Like you should spend time with all of them, play them at all dynamic levels, play around with where you put the accent. Because, you know, working on that stuff is just going to make you a better player. I think that's about it, honestly. I talked about just about everything. So we can turn it over to questions if you guys have any. If you have any questions for me about my job day to day or drumming in general, life in general.
What do you suggest for someone who doesn't have a bass drum pad? I've been playing on like pillows and stuff, but I don't have any specific like way of practicing on a head without annoying the crap out of my neighbors.
I love this question, and it's something that I've thought about a lot, because the way we practice at the Olga, let me grab the. So I don't know if you've been to Junior's workshop yet, but this is just a drum set thrown, right? And we just, you can see there's a bunch of wear and tear right here. That's from us hitting it with the bass drum mallets. And it's better than playing on rubber with mallets. It actually doesn't feel that bad. And it's a lower sound than a drum pad like this, so it helps you think about blend when you're just working on pads with a snare drummer. But obviously that's not ideal. We don't play this way. We play this way. Bass drum is like the only lateral played percussion instrument besides some world instruments. But the thing that helps me, I realized this when I was in training. I was like, holy crap, this actually makes a lot of sense. If you look at right here, look at the bend in my elbow. I don't know if it's that apparent, but this is where my arm hangs like this. If I sit a little bit lower, if you literally no mallets, you don't even need mallets for this, because what you can do is slap your thumb against your wrist. It looks a little ridiculous, admittedly, but the technique and the muscle memory, you can do swings like this. You can reach up for overheads and pretend you have a bass drum in front of you. That is more beneficial for practicing these types of motions, because you're literally doing them. You can't do that on a practice pad. So when I don't have this, I'm just in like a hotel room or something, and I'm, looking like a goober. But yeah,
I've done that, and so it's good to know that practicing sitting down is an option.
Yeah.
Because that's always been like a thing. Sometimes I'll tuck my knees up and play on the side of my thighs like that with my thumbs. So okay, good. I wanted to make sure I wasn't like screwing up the ergonomics of practicing by sitting down while I did it.
Yeah, arguably playing this way makes more sense than playing on a snare drum. There are things that you're missing out on. So I would argue you got to do both. Like understanding, like there's some mass that wants to push back a little bit when you're hitting an actual hard surface. So you are missing out on that a little bit. But if you're just working on like memorizing music, that's a really good tip.